Hello everyone, welcome back to Action webinar series from Concept to Code. I'm Trupti Bhosle, your host and Technical Workforce Manager for Q at Axelerant. So for friends, in the first webinar of this Concept to Code series, we discuss about the first phase, which is the requirement gathering phase. Um, if by any chance you have not watched the requirement gathering webinar, I would recommend watch that video first. So in today's webinar, we are going to discuss the second most important phase of SDLC, which is grooming and POC. It is a very important phase of SDLC as it helps in creating project plans more clearer and workable. Today's webinar will be presented by Kalaiselvan, Technical Program Manager at Axelerant with a huge tech experience. So let's welcome Kalai to know more about the hows and the whats of grooming and POC. Hey Kalai.
Hello everyone. Hello everyone. Hi Tripti.
Hi.
Thank you.
All set for the second webinar of this series, Concept to Code.
Yes, yeah, very much. This is one of the most interesting phases that we a lot of discussions happen around. So I am very much looking forward to.
Cool. I will not hold you here for a long time. Let's just dive into your presentation quickly. All the best, Kalai.
Thank you. Hello everyone. Let's deep dive into this phase where we will look into grooming and POC. So in the last session, we looked at and we discussed a lot about the why part, which is the requirement gathering phase. And in this session, we will deep dive into grooming and POC, which is the how part. So before we go into the grooming and POC specifically, I want to also touch base on kind of a famous concept, which is called the golden circle by Simon Sinek. So in this, it is said that for any work that you do in your organization or even outside of your work, there are three different aspects that you would need to know about, or you obviously know about. So one of which is which is the very basic question that if you ask anyone what they are doing, they would have a very clear answer that this is what I am doing, and which is the kind of the tangible outputs or results which are aligned with why and how, but we will see why it needs to be aligned. The what majorly talks about the tangible outputs, that kind of results from your action, and the next part is the how, which is like what are the methods by which you achieve whatever you are delivering, which is the what. So these unique methods can be the tools that you use or the processes that you use, and also it can be the values that we hold on and we continue throughout our journey. So in this case, it can be also Axelerant's values, which we value throughout our journey at Axelerant. And this describes how we deliver something in our own unique way, and that is the how part. And the most important part here is the why part, which is kind of the driving purpose or the belief behind every action. So it is important because it kind of tells what's your main purpose, right? And the major thing to grasp from this concept is that it's always we need to kind of proceed from the inner circle towards the outer circle, whereas it is usually the other way around. And that is not recommended, because it's always important to start with your why and proceed towards to your how and finally the what. However, because why needs a lot of more reflection and a lot of introspection, we kind of directly proceed to the how and what when our why are still not clear. And here in this context, the why part is the requirement gathering, which we discussed in the previous session, and the how part is the grooming and POC, which we will discuss in this session, and what part is the actual implementation, which we will discuss in the next session. So yeah, that's why I wanted to kind of emphasize on the importance of understanding the requirements first and understanding why you are doing what you are doing, and then we can it's always you can always find multiple ways to achieve your how and what, but your why kind of plays a very crucial role here. So yeah, let's proceed further into the how part now. Yeah. So here we have two topics which are kind of very closely related, which is grooming and proof of concept. And most common question that we have is both how are both different and related? Both are closely related, and grooming is more to kind of identify or the approach that you want to do for this particular ticket, and proof of concept is used in cases when you want to kind of identify a gray area or something that you're not sure of when you start with. So it kind of aids grooming in a very good way, and we will discuss more in this session. So, like we discussed in the previous session, we will also touch base on different aspects of this phase, like the entry and the exit criteria, the who are all involved, and how much they need to contribute, and what can we do differently, and finally, what is the significance of this grooming and POC phase. So the entry criteria for the grooming phase is, of course, the completion of the previous phase, which is the requirement gathering. So we at least need to know that for this iteration, the requirement gathering is done, and we know what we need to do or why we are doing what we are doing, and then we proceed with the how part. So and in the exit criteria is usually the implementation details, and this might differ for specific roles. So implementation details is for a developer, and for a QA, it might be writing or coming up with a test strategy or test cases. And yes, during the grooming and POC phase, if you feel that you kind of feel that the requirements have changed or needs to be changed, and it is important to revisit the acceptance criteria and the user story as well, in case your understanding of the requirement changes during the grooming phase. And it's okay to go back to the previous phase and kind of revalidate your user story or your acceptance criteria. So before we go in depth into the roles and the contribution, I would like to also kind of highlight on a topic which is related to it, which is the RACI matrix. So in this RACI matrix, it actually kind of stands for responsible, accountable, supportive, consulted, and informed. But it is kind of what really is RACI. RACI is more kind of a framework that kind of allows you to clearly call out what are the expectations from each role, like listed in this table, and it can be any role in your team, and along with the tasks, and for each task, what is the level of involvement that you are expecting from each role. So as we look at the various roles here, like a person who's responsible or accountable, it kind of denotes the level of involvement or engagement that's necessary from that role. In this case, the person who's responsible and supportive is actually more involved than the other roles, and following which the person who's accountable is a little less involved, but still involved to a good extent, but lesser than a person who's responsible or supportive. And going further, a person who's consulted is more kind of someone who's pulled on a pull basis rather than always being available, and yeah, a person is consulted for any advice or inputs or whatever might be needed, and the person who's informed is the least involved in that particular task, and this person just needs to be informed in timely manner that this is the kind of work that we are doing, and and the information needs to be passed to them. So it kind of if you kind of see the level of involvement, responsible and supportive are more involved, followed by accountable, and consulted and informed are comparatively less involved, or very less involved compared to the other groups. So in this table, we kind of call out for each task who's responsible and who's accountable. There are some thumb rules as well, like only one person needs to be accountable for any work, and there can be multiple people who are responsible and supporting for that particular work, and there can be multiple people who needs to be consulted as well and also informed. But it's important that the person who's accountable is only one, and who kind of owns the task end to end and makes sure that the task provides the necessary outcome that is expected out of it. And apart from it, it also means that if a person is responsible, then that person is also kind of doing a role which is kind of less involved than that. So a person who's responsible can also support others in those cases. And a person who's consulted is also informed. So that's also the inbuilt understanding of this framework. So let's proceed further into who will be responsible and who will be accountable in this particular phase. And similarly, in future phases also, we will be discussing in terms of this matrix. So, and hence it's important that we understand this matrix. So for grooming and POC, the developer is the person who's responsible for the implementation details, for writing the implementation details for that particular ticket. And the QA is will be responsible for test strategy and test cases. So as part of the grooming, it's important that the QA also has a good understanding of the ticket and also goes through the what need to be the test strategy and what are the test cases that needs to be executed for this particular ticket, and the entire team can support as needed, and that's in any phase. However, the tech lead and the project manager is someone who can be consulted on a pull basis, and in the case of a tech lead, it can be something like in order to validate if a particular approach is right or wrong, or is are there if there are multiple approaches, the inputs can be got from the tech lead in order to validate any specific approach. And similarly, the project manager can need to be consulted in these cases when you need to verify whether something that you are doing is in scope or any out of scope things as well. So it's important that both of them are consulted, and it's up to the developer or the QA or the rest of the team to decide when they need to be consulted as well. Yeah. So going further, what can we do differently in this particular phase? So it's usually kind of looked at is POC kind of close to actual implementation, or how different it is from the actual implementation. I would say POC is not equal to actual implementation, of course, because it's done much more, much earlier than that. However, it's important when we start the POC, we are focused on the outcome or the area under investigation. And we also focus on kind of de-risking whatever we feel is a risk in that particular ticket or particular task. So it's important that we identify the risk earlier, and also you convert the risk into assumption, and it's more than anything, it's more important to know when you need to stop working on the POC. And it's also important to able to differentiate to between your personal learning and also your project learning, because your personal learning might be something that you will be able to apply in any project, whereas a project learning is something that kind of requires you to learn something which is very specific to that project. So during the grooming and the POC phase, you might be doing a lot of learnings as well, and that's why it's important that you differentiate between both and spend your time wisely in both. And also it's very important what is the client persona as well here, because different clients expect different level of involvement during this phase as well. Some clients would like you to be more collaborative, kind of discuss with them the approaches that you are planning to do, and also consult them as well if they are okay with the approach. And some clients would expect you to kind of give them a solution that will work, and they expect you to be the expert to provide with one best solution. In both the cases, you need to take a call of the level of involvement that you need to have with the client. And finally, you also need to value the outcome more than the output. Here, the output can be the implementation detail or the test cases or test strategy written by the QA. However, it's more important what value we are adding to the business via the approach that we are suggesting, and more than just coming up with an approach. And that's why it's important to come up with multiple approaches as well in order to see which is the best or ideal at that point of time, and then take a call accordingly. So wherever we can provide more value to the business, like if it can solve more than expected than what is expected out of the ticket by within the same amount of effort, then it's good to do that as well. So yeah, that's about the providing more value. And also it's important to kind of reflect, have we asked enough questions in the previous phase, which is the requirement gathering phase. So because if you're not clear on something, it's anywhere, it's never late to kind of ask your questions. So you can still ask your questions to the customer and clarify whatever you need in order to handle this particular phase effectively. Yeah. Coming on to the significance of this phase, the major significance of this phase is you will arrive at an initial plan or approach on how you want to implement something, and also it also helps you to uncover risk early on. so that if there are some gray areas like we discussed, it helps you to uncover those risks as well. And it kind of needed to iterate regularly. And if your assumptions are changing, you need to also go back to your previous phase and kind of iterate it if needed. Because if the assumptions change, your understanding of the ticket also changes. And hence, it's important to validate your assumptions regularly. And if it changes, then you might have to change some things in the user story or acceptance criteria or even in your approach. And finally, you will become effective and efficient only when you do more of this, right? So it's important that you learn from your earlier mistakes when you are grooming, what you learn from your previous tickets as well. And it's more important to also share those learnings, because we are kind of working in a similar tech stack, and it's very much possible that we might be solving similar problems. So it's important that you share your learnings as well in some documented way, so that if someone else is facing a similar problem, they need not spend the same time in their ticket as well, and they can of course use your learnings as well. And finally, it's important that we apply those learnings to the future tickets, and hence it's important that you iterate on it and kind of and that's when you become more effective and efficient on this. And that's about the major significance of this phase. Now let's have Tripti to hear her thoughts on this session.
Thank you, Kalai. Thank you for the detailed, information on grooming and POC. I would like to ask some questions from my end. Kalai, what strategies do you use to document and validate assumptions made during grooming?
Yeah, the assumptions are usually kind of called out in the estimation sheet, where we mention the assumptions as a note at the end. However, it's important that we clearly identify it and also call it out to the customer verbally and in the tickets in multiple places as much as possible, so that they are not overlooked. And it's also important that we convert our risk into assumptions, because whatever we are operating, we operate with a set constraints as of that point of time. So that's what we call as assumptions, and usually it's in the back of our mind, and we kind of sometimes also fail to call out, but we add numbers to things without calling out the assumptions. So that's why it's important that we call out it in the estimation sheet as well, which we will look more in the next sessions.
Cool. Cool. And Kali, there's a challenging part when I see working with cross-functional team. There's a challenge that comes during grooming. So, are there any best practices that you would like to share for conducting effective grooming session with cross-functional teams?
Yeah, I agree. It will be challenging because we can expect to get different perspectives from when working with cross-functional teams. And I would, from my experience, I would recommend to kind of first align on the outcome that we are trying to arrive with different teams, and if we are aligned on the outcome for that particular ticket, then it might be necessary to kind of go back to your desk and kind of deep dive into your specific domain or your specific area of expertise, and invest more time and kind of come up with multiple approaches as well for your. Let's say there is a design person who's working on a design, then they can go back and brainstorm within the team on different approaches and come up with multiple approaches as well. And once they come up with these approaches, it's important that we reconvene as well as a larger group, and also kind of understand if which approach kind of satisfies the end goal. And it is bound that any work that we do kind of has one or two end goals that we align with. So it's important we tie back our outputs with our end goal, and that's when it becomes a real outcome.
Thank you for this webinar, Kalai. And thank you everyone for joining. If you want to reach out to Kalai for any more questions, please reach out to them on LinkedIn. And we will be soon back with another session of Concept to Code with Kalai. Until then, take care. Bye bye.